Welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Holland. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Director of Organization Community Initiatives here at South Arts. Thank you for joining us for this workshop today. Just a few notes before I turn it over to Maria. If you look at your menu screen, you should have the option to either disable your captions or you can keep them on. They are enabled. We will be recording this session. It is actively recording. The reason we're recording is so we can share it later with others who may not have been able to be here, or you can use it as a reference later on, which I think you'll want to. The content's great. When we do that, we will download it and then have it professionally captioned, because we know sometimes that these AI captioning services don't get everything correctly in the first go. So we'll have it professionally captioned and then re-uploaded to the site with those captions. And we'll be doing that as soon as possible. And my dog says hello in the background, as they do. So I'm gonna just real quick, we are monitoring questions. We decided to do this as a meeting and not a webinar. So there could be a little bit more interaction. You are welcome to use emojis or ask questions in the chat. We won't answer them right away, but we will pause throughout and read your questions aloud. So if we don't get to you right away, just know that it's coming. So without any further ado, I want to turn it over to Maria and let her introduce herself. And she's so gracious enough to be here on this Friday morning to offer this content. So Maria, I'm gonna spotlight you and then just let you take over this presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jessica. By the way, have we started recording yet?
We have started recording. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So hey everyone, welcome. My name is Maria Lamardo, pronouns she, her. I am the head of accessibility training and education at CVS Health. I've been at CVS for about 2 years, and I've been really passionate about accessibility for the last couple of years as I got into the tech industry. So with that, let me quickly go ahead and share my screen, and let's get into today's topic. Let me quickly open up the chat here so I have that visible as we chat. Okay, so give me 1 second, trying to get access to the chat and my presentation notes over here. Okay, here we go. All right, so getting into it today, we're going to be talking about web accessibility, and then we're going to be touching a little bit on Google Forms. So today's audience is really targeted for designers, content creators. We're going to talk a little bit about some technical pieces, but really it's more geared for designers. So we're going to talk about kind of introducing web accessibility, what it is. We're going to have a little brief overview of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines and some of the design considerations that we could take from that. And then we're going to be really going into creating accessible Google Forms. So let's talk about what it means to have an accessible website, right? So this really means that we're creating a website or an application that anyone can use, right? So we want to make sure that everyone's able to access our applications, access the content, interact with the things that are meant to be interactive, right? So before we get too into that, I want to talk about some stats, right? Disabilities around the world. So actually around 1 billion people worldwide have some sort of disability. And according to the World Health Organization, people with disabilities are actually the world's largest minority. So that's a big number. We also have that counts for about 15% of the world population. And then they have about $6 trillion of spending power. So when you're not creating accessible content, you're really missing out on a lot of people. So before we get into it, I wanted to talk about something that people can understand, right? So let's talk about accessibility of the physical spaces. So here we have a building entrance with multiple staircases leading to the entrance, but they're are no ramps. Maybe there's an elevator inside, but for now, I'm not seeing a way to enter the main entrance. So we have a couple of staircases that probably lead up to 3 different floors, but again, no ramp. So I'm going to go to the next example. Here we have an outdoor stairs leading to multiple floors, and there is a winding ramp kind of zigzagging from left to right over and over. I think it does this about 8 or 9 times all the way up the stairs. Now, while this is visually appealing and it seems to be solving the problem, like, hey, we've added ramps to our stairs, it's not very accessible. For example, somebody would need to, again, zigzag 9 times to go all the way up. There are no rails going along the ramp, so that's not very safe. And the distance to your final destination without being able to stop or take a break is way too long. So let's get into another example. So this one's a little bit more accessible, right? So we have a nice ramp on the side of the building. Although it's more accessible, it does require people to go through the side of the building to have that entrance instead of going to the main entrance like almost everyone else, right? So we're creating kind of like a different experience. Next, we have other examples that are of accessible ramps, but then they ran into some problems. So for example, on the left-hand side, we're going to see a permanent structure blocking the ramp. So there's a street pole just right in the middle of the ramp blocking the path. Again, accessible ramp, and then they added a pole, making it completely inaccessible. Here we have another example of a perfectly fine ramp, and then they've added an oversized flower pot in the middle, blocking the path yet again. So that seems pretty heavy. I can't imagine people are going to be able to move that very easily. So again, we've grabbed something that is accessible and was designed with accessibility in mind, and yet it's still inaccessible. And here we have a nice ramp, right? It leads right to the entrance of the building. There are no flower pots or poles blocking the ramp, right? This is pretty good. And everyone can go in. It's pretty easy. However, I want to talk about inclusive design, right? Which is kind of designing things to be used for as many people as possible, and while creating that's like one experience, right? So take a look at this and consider buildings that don't have any steps to get in, and everyone can have the same access to the main entrance. So this is a lot more inclusive, and it creates a better and an equal experience for everyone. So this is kind of how I want you to think about the accessibility in the digital space. There are many ways to make things accessible, and then there are ways to make things accessible in a way that are great user experiences. So let's go to the next slide. So again, we just want to make sure that you're designing your digital products in a way that's accessible for anyone. And just like you wouldn't build a 10-story building without an elevator, there are a few things that you need to consider when designing digital content. So the W3C says that the web is fundamentally designed to work for all people, whatever their hardware, software, language, location, or ability. So when we're building accessible content, we're actually meeting this goal. And meeting accessibility improves the online experiences for all users. So let's talk about understanding the digital experiences of all people. First, I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with different types of assistive technologies that exist. So really considering what tools people are using to navigate the web, and we'll actually go over a few of them today. And then think about not just what tools they're using, but how they're using those tools to navigate the web. And then you should also consider how design decisions impact those experiences. And again, we're going to go over some techniques that you could take away today to apply to your products. But not just that, remember that ramp with the flower pot and the pole, you don't just have to design for it, but you have to adopt best practices to build accessible content, right? Like implementation is just as important as designing accessible content. And then you should really be including people with disabilities as part of your process. This could mean hiring people with disabilities so that they bring that voice into your product, or doing inclusive research with people with disabilities so that you get that feedback. And luckily, we're going to learn about all of these today. So first, let's get into different types of disabilities. Let's start with motor, and let's talk about some of the assistive technologies that someone with motor skills issues might rely on. So they might rely on voice recognition software, eye tracking tools, mouth sticks, head wands, adaptive keyboards, or single switch access. So here's an example of a multiple single switch accesses connected to a single device. So people can just use that one switch to activate certain commands. Then we have a man wearing an adjustable head stylus to interact with his device. And then we have another example of a man sitting at the table using a mouse stick to interact with his device. So these are some of the technologies that you might see. Then we've got visual disabilities. So here we have, people might rely on screen magnification tools or screen readers or Braille displays. Now here's what a Braille display looks like. So this allows people to kind of read the content on their screen and also create content. Then let's talk about auditory disabilities. Things that we're going to be seeing here are things like hearing aid, and people are really relying on things like sign language, captioning, or transcripts to really understand the content. And here we have, of course, hearing aids, and then we have technologies like phones that have little screens that will read out, that will spell out what is being said, right? So there are many different types of assistive technologies to help. And then we've got cognitive disabilities, which people might be using cognitive aids or communication tools, like this device here that has this communication tool called Protocol to Go that allows you to kind of select, and this device, or depending on the tools that you're using, might have like a voice speaking for you. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of people using their assistive technologies. So I'm just gonna open this up.
So Mark from University of California, San Francisco's IT Web Services Department. Brief tour of screen reading technology. I'm a blind person who has been using screen readers, braille writers, scanning equipment, other adaptive technologies since my childhood. What a screen reader does is, for example, I'm going to start to read this page. And what I will now do is slow down the speech rate.
75%, 70%, 65%, 60%, 55%, 50%, 45%, 40%. Link, UCSF Medical Center.
So as I was about to say, a screen reader converts what's on a computer screen into information that can be displayed through synthetic speech or Braille output. And it does that by allowing you to use a computer instead of a mouse, a computer keyboard instead of a mouse. You can also use a Braille display as an input device.
And navigation.
And what it does is it cleverly determines what's on the screen and presents you that information in a way that would allow for efficient navigation of these pages. So for example, I could just keep reading.
Banner 3 items. Visited, link, image, home.
Line by line, and we could be here all day. Or I could jump to the first heading on the page.
Heading level 2. Search for heading level 2. You are here. Heading level 1. Make videos accessible.
So as I'm moving down through the page, I can look for the category that interests me. And I'm just using commands built into the screen reader. So that's all a pretty simple description of what a screen reader is all about. Now I'm going to go over and show a few examples of how that can fall apart. So I have a couple graphics on this page.
Mark Sutton hands on the MacBook Pro image.
So the first one is well described and uses an alt tag.
You are currently on it.
To describe what that graphic is all about. Now we go to the next graphic.
Reader 042116.jpg.
Much less useful. So it's important to use those elements. It's also true for tables. So I'm going to move to a table.
FDA approved medications. Table, 3 columns, 5 rows. FDA approved medications.
So the table is pretty self-explanatory, and I'm going to move into the table.
Medicine. Approved. Column 2 of 3.
And then if I go down into the table,
Medicine. Tolbutamide.
and as I move across,
Approved. 1975. Column 2 of 3.
we're getting the labels for the column headers and row headers. So it's important when programming tables, forms, and other elements on the web pages to use the proper HTML codes. I'll go to the
Table 3 columns.
second table on the page.
Medicine. Row 2 of 5 tolbutamide.
And as I'm in the table, I move across it.
Row November 1995.
I get a date, but I don't know what that date is associated with. So it's
So I'll post it there. So you'll kind of got a brief look on what the experience is like, right? So we've got to make sure that our images are well described, that our content is built in a way that assistive technologies can interact the way that they're expecting to interact with it. Next, I'm going to show you a brief demo on voice control.
Hello, I'm going to give you a quick demonstration of Dragon Naturally Speaking. Dragon Naturally Speaking is a command and control type of assistive technology. This means that I can control my computer using only my voice, and I don't need to use a mouse or keyboard. So the way this works is that I can give commands to actually have Dragon start listening to what I said. Start listening. Go to sleep. I can also have it go to sleep so that I can talk to you all without having it try to act on the words that I'm saying. Wake up. Start Internet Explorer. Click Form Demo. Click full name. Thomas Logan. Press tab. Now I've saved a command for my email address so that I can easily input it into this field. Wake up. My work email address. Click radio button. 1. Click checkbox. 1. Press tab. Press tab. Go to sleep.
So I'm just going to pause this here really quick and say, he's able to say something like, go to radio button, go to checkbox, right? How is he able to do that? Well, the developers who built this form out thought about the semantics of this. So they used the right things to build this out. That way, assistive technologies were able to access that by simply saying, go to radio. It recognized that was a radio option, right? And then it went on that section of the form, and then he was able to interact with it.
When Dragon is in dictation mode, I am able to speak any type of text, and it will try to translate as best as it can. Wake up. Please let me know when the North Carolina t-shirt becomes available. Period. Press tab. Go to sleep. Now I've given focus to a custom control. This control has been made perfectly accessible, so I can easily control it with my voice, with the keyboard, or with the mouse. I'll show you how all three options work. Wake up. Click Next State. Click Previous State. Press right. Press right. Mouse grid. 9. 1. 4. 6. 6. Click.
So I'll pause it there and say, what we saw there was kind of a grid. So when people might not know what something is called on the page, so for example, he was able to say previous state or next state because he knew that that's what those arrows were called. But as you can see, like that label isn't really anywhere. So unless you know that that's what it's called, you might have to rely on something like the grid to kind of start narrowing down the section of the page that you want a mouse click on. So again, when we build something that has a proper label and people know what that label is, it makes that experience a lot easier and they can interact with things a lot faster. Then when I have this one final demo for somebody using a Braille display.
Vision impaired people. Today, I'd like to demonstrate our brand new Braille Note Touch, which is the first Google certified Braille tablet. So this is the Braille Note Touch. It's HumanWare's latest generation of note takers. We've been making Braille notes for many years, which are productivity devices, allowing people to take notes, schedule appointments, etc. The difference between past versions and this one is that it's a Google certified Braille tablet. So it's a note taker, but it's based on an Android platform, which allows us to use Android apps as well as our own programs. It's a unit that allows me to do Braille entry with the Braille keys on top, and it has a Braille display so I can read the text that I'm producing or reading from other people. By doing a W, I can jump straight to the word processor.
Word processor, keyword.
And you'll notice it has speech as well. I press enter because I want the word processor.
Keyword recovery file exists. Keyword do not personalize the session properly. Do you want to open the recovery file to save it or discard it?
It's given me a message telling me I forgot to close my other message properly, and there's a discard button. I'll just do D.
Discard button.
And enter.
Keyword menu.
Now I'm going to do C for create.
Create.
Enter.
Warning. Please wait 3 period.
And it allows me now to write, this is a test document, not very original. And I can read that in Braille. I can play it back with speech.
This is a text document.
And I can slow it down.
Fast. Normal. Slow. Very slow.
Whoops, I've slowed it down too much.
Very slow.
And so
Top.
it's
Slow.
it allows me to also use a headphone, etc. So I can write my document, my notes, my thesis, whatever I'm writing, and I can exit out of this document.
Word exit keyword. Do you want to save your document?
Do I want to save it? Let's
No.
say N
Yes,
for no,
no button.
enter.
Keyword menu.
Now what's remarkable
Create.
about this is in an environment where I have support from sighted people, I can lift up the screen and I've got a visual display on the tablet. So I can now work with sighted peers to collaborate with them. If I'm a student and I want the teacher to check my work, they can look in at the visual display to see what I've written. But I can also Braille directly on this screen. By touching the screen, I can get a
Open.
access to the document, access by touching the Braille only.
All right, so I hope that that gave you a sense of what it's like to navigate the web with the Braille display. All right, so let's talk about what are some of the rules or how do we make our sites accessible, right? So the W3C actually created a web content accessibility guidelines, which provide guidance to content creators to create more accessible digital content. I want to mention though, although this is a great place to start, we still have applications that meet all of the rules outlined here that could still be made more accessible. So just like the entrances that we saw in the previous slide where we have zigzagging ramps, compare that to the buildings that just have no steps for their entrance, right? So this is kind of what we're getting at. Like we create, there are multiple ways to create accessible experiences, but we really want to shoot for the best user experience possible. So to combat this, you should really work to bring in people with lived experiences, so people who have disabilities in your designing process so that you could really understand how people are using your applications and your content. And of course, I've linked the guidelines here if you're interested in reading them. They're really fun. All right, but let's go into some of the four main guiding principles of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and they have the abbreviation of POUR. Now, POUR stands for perceivable, which is users must be able to perceive information being presented, meaning that it cannot be invisible to their senses. Then operable, which means user interfaces and controls or navigations are operable, meaning that you must not require an interaction that a user cannot perform. Then we want to make sure that all of our content is understandable, meaning that information and operations within that user interface are understood by everyone and doesn't go beyond the user's understanding. Then we've got robust, meaning that users are able to access your content as technology advances. So this is more definitely of a technical thing, but you really want to make sure that your content remains accessible as technologies evolve. All right, so how do we get started, right? Again, number one, incorporate real users, partner with your disability communities. Follow some simple design rules. If you carefully craft and design accessible content, you should be able to improve accessibility of your content. Then, of course, accessible implementation, ensuring that you're implementing accessible code. And then, of course, test your products. Make sure that all your interactive elements are operable by a keyboard alone. So let's get into some design rules for our main principles. So poor, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So getting into perceivable. First, we've got text alternatives. So this is really about images, making sure that you're providing the right alt text for non-text content. So let's get into an activity for this. And I have that opened here. So let's get into informative images, right? So actually, let me go over some rules and then let's get into some examples. We want to make sure that we're using clear and concise language. We want to aim for sharing an equivalent experience for everyone. We want to make sure that we're using language that is at around a 9th grade level of primary education. 9 years of primary education, I'm sorry. You want to make sure that you're not going over 100 characters in your alt text, as some assistive technologies won't be able to pick up past that amount of characters. You also want to transcribe any images of text when they cannot be avoided. So you should be always adding actual text instead of using images of text, unless it's something like a logo where you can't avoid using that image of text. And then, of course, avoid using redundant information or acronyms in your image descriptions. And of course, this is kind of going to that redundant information, but don't use words like picture, image of, or logo, graphic in your alt text, as assistive technologies already are recognizing these pieces of content as images. So it's kind of saying like image, right? So let's get into some examples. So let's go over informative images. So these images will serve a purpose in your site. So let's go over that example. So here we have a couple of pictures, right? So we have of a little baby girl on a little blanket. Then we've got 3 toddlers kind of hugging each other. And then at the end here, we have a basket full of little kittens in a field. So I'm just going to open up the floor, and can you all tell me what we think would be the best alt text for the first image where we have a little girl laying down on a blanket? So let's see, you could put it in the chat or you could unmute yourself. Feel free to participate in any way you feel comfortable. So we have a couple of things coming in. So we have young baby girl crawling on a blanket, white baby wearing large bow lies on their stomach on a blanket outdoors. Ooh, that's a nice one. How do we know it's a girl? Yep, great point. Baby girl laying outside on a blanket with a yellow bright ribbon on their hair. Yep. Cute baby with a big bow on a blanket. Yep, perfect. All of those would work, right? And I would say, what is the intent of you adding this image on your website? Is the intent, like maybe you have a website for selling those big bows on this baby's head, right? So maybe you want to focus on describing the bow, or maybe you or have a quilting business and then you actually want to highlight the throw that's on the floor, right? So you really want to work with your designers to understand the intent, like what are they trying to get the users to see or perceive from this image, right? So like, depending on the content of the page, you really want to bring that same experience. Same thing with the little three kids on the right, or even the kittens, right? Like, are we selling, is this like an adoption agency for cats, or is this kind of like a basket business, or is this just like decorative, or what is our intent for including this picture in our design? All right. Next, let's talk about yeah, so again, the text alternative should convey the emotional and information content presented by the image. Next, let's talk about decorative images. So these are images that are purely decorative on the page, and they serve no other purpose, right? They don't serve to provide more information on the page. Here, the text alternative should be empty so that it is not picked up by assistive technologies. So again, this is for purely decorative images. So here's an example. Let's say this is, and it has some like Lorem Ipsum on the bottom, so it's kind of like meaningless text. But let's say that I have this image and it's kind of a brick pattern background. And let's say that I have that as one of like an image behind my banner or something. it's not necessarily something that I want my users to know. I might just have that there because it's visually appealing to me and that's part of our brand and I want to bring it in. So depending on the type that they're including in your designs. Same with images of text, as we discussed before. You should be avoiding using images of text unless it's part of a logo. And then if you're using this, text alternative should have a match to the words of in the image. So let's talk about that. So here I have a couple of examples. So all the way to the left, we have a picture of a sign that says we can sell men and women up to 70% off. In the middle image, we have save up to 50% Black Friday sale. Then all the way to the right, we have an image of a Google logo. So that just says Google, right? So that's an example of a logo that uses words and it's still part of an image, right? So when we're looking at our alt text, and in fact, a way to check your alt text, you can right click on an image and inspect. And in fact, if you're using Chrome, you could grab the little inspect tool. So it's called select an element on the page. And then if I even hover over them, I can start seeing some of the images that, some of the alt text that was provided there. And I'm just quickly going to go over, again, I'm in Chrome under the accessibility tab. And I'll just expand this and you could see, again, I just right click, inspect, went over the accessibility tab on the bottom of DevTools. And then I could see right here, here's the alt text that says image. It recognizes this as an image and the alt text is save up to 50% off Black Friday sale. It's time to save big, which is like that little text underneath inside that image. So again, you want to make sure that everything is readable and providing that alt text equivalent. So I see a question for what is the right code to write for a decorative images. So this is alt equals and then just like empty quotation marks. So that's going to allow assistive technologies to kind of skip that and browsers to recognize that as a decorative image. So let me just show you really quick. I'm seeing a question about the alt text. So you can go to inspect. When you're inspecting, it will highlight that specific element that you're on. So you should be able to hover over that little highlighted section and your image should be highlighted. If you expand on the bottom, again, I'm using Chrome. So this is where I'm seeing this. And there's this tab called styles, go all the way to the right. If you're not seeing it, you might have to expand the options there, but there is a tab called accessibility, where if you're highlighting that image, you should be able to see that alt text. Alrighty, so now let's talk about time-based media alternatives. So these are how we create media content that is accessible. I'm just going to play this very briefly.
Hundreds of animals gather at the bottom of Pride Rock, a tall, flat ledge that towers over the rest of the savannah. Zazu, a small blue bird with a large beak, flaps to the ledge. He bows to Mufasa, a powerful, dignified lion with a thick red mane.
All right, so we saw that this is kind of a clip of Lion King. I recommend you watch all of it because it's really nice. But you could see that it started describing what was happening, right? It was very descriptive and it gave you that emotion that you're feeling as you're watching this, right? So like you're kind of creating that similar experience as you're watching this by creating like really nice audio descriptions. So for media content, you really should be providing captions and text transcripts where possible, provide sign language and interpretation of audio content, again, where possible, provide audio description of important video details, as we saw in this example, and then do not automatically play your videos on any of your sites. Allow users to play that for themselves and have control over any media content on the page. And again, yeah, provide media controls for anything longer than 5 seconds. All right, and next, let's talk about creating adaptable content, meaning that your content should be should work if people are like changing orientation of their device, or able to access tables correctly, right? Like access all of your content correctly, and of course, we want to make sure that our content is easy for everybody to see or hear. One of those things that I want to show you is our color contrast activity. So here we have an example of some content. Some of the color contrast on this page isn't great. Like for example, here is a sentence that says the color contrast is too low and it's really, really hard to see. It's like this almost baby green color against the white background. And then this one is a regular blue color against the white background. So like that's strong and dark and I can see it clearly on the page. So actually, if you, there are a couple of tools that we can use to make sure that our content has the right color contrast, and I'll show you that in a second. So let's talk about some of the considerations for this first. So you make sure that you're not using color alone to convey any information. So avoid things like go to the highlighted blue text for the answer, or click on the red link for the answer, because some people might not even be able to recognize what the red link is, right? Or they might miss it altogether. Make sure that your content, when you're using color, that you're meeting color contrast, that your images of text should be avoided. And then here we have a little rule, a little cheat sheet of rules from the WCAG. So this is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, gives us this color contrast rules that we should follow. So I know this is a lot of numbers, but they recommend that for normal text, you should be at a 4.5:1 contrast, for large text 3:1, and then for user interfaces 3:1. Let's talk a little bit about what that means. So I'm going to open up this color tool, which is one of my favorite tools to use when deciding colors for my application. And in this page, they allow you to choose two colors, one for the top, the kind of your content, right? So like as you see, if I update this color, I'm going to change it to something different like red. We could see this color updating on the examples that they have underneath here, right? So so that's for the foreground color. You can also change the background color. And as you see, as I'm updating these colors, I'm seeing some of these text change. So I'm seeing some fail messages across different things. So I'm seeing that maybe this doesn't have a good color contrast ratio, because it also gives me this contrast value here. So looking at our table, we know that that color contrast is way too low to meet any of our outline guidance, right? So as I start like improving this color, so let's say that I make it white against a black background, we see that everything passes. We see that this little table now shows a very, very high contrast ratio. So that tells me that this is a lot better than what we started with. And again, you can kind of play around with these colors, check out your brand colors. I definitely recommend you using this tool to test out what type of colors work best for you on your site. And on the bottom here, it also tests for user interface. So like if you have little icons or contrast around your input fields, it will also check for that. All right. Let's go to, this is an example of a color wheel, and I used this tool called Color Oracle to kind of create these different types of interpretations of this same color wheel through different color blindness. So we've got some color blindness that you can see, they won't pick up any of the reds or any of the greens. Then we have some that won't pick up that everything is kind of on a hue or pink reddish color. And then we even have some that are completely grayscale. So this is what I mean when I say do not use color alone to signify anything important on your page, because this might be the experience of some of your users and they might completely miss out on what you're trying to convey. All right, so I'll take a little pause here and see if we have any questions.
Thank you so much, Maria. This is Karonda from South Arts. Just want to jump in with a question from the chat. A viewer today said, I create free events on behalf of my nonprofit organization. Does AWS allow for this type of integration? And she relies on tech grants to offset related costs.
So let's see, I'm not sure what type of integration you're speaking about, but I will say that, yeah, and I don't know if the person who asked this question wants to kind of jump on and clarify, but I will say that you should be able to apply any of the things that I went through today in any of your applications, and it should be supported.
Hi, yes, my name is Sidnitra Bates. I actually asked that question. I apologize if it wasn't clear. But because I am a nonprofit, I do utilize tech grants to help with offsetting costs related to different things that we need to do for the organization. And this is definitely an important one, but financially, are there ways to incorporate the integration with little or no funds? I guess that's the best way I can think about it.
Yeah, I would say that there are a lot of accessibility resources online that are available for free that you can definitely use to train your team on. So that way you don't have to bring any more or outside help for this. Definitely check out some free resources. There is an amazing kind of series on YouTube called AllyCast, and I'll type it in the chat here. So it's like an A11Y cast. And they're really great about going through some of the components, and especially if you're working with a development team, how to test for some of these, how to use some assistive technology. So definitely check it out. And of course, look at my presentation has some links to the W3C web content accessibility guidelines and some guides that I'll be sharing to help your development teams and your design teams kind of make the right decisions for you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, do we have any other questions?
Yeah, just more of a comment / request. Just want to reiterate, a couple people were talking about the demos that you provided for Dragon and Braille readers and the screen reader. So those were demonstrations of what that experience would be like for another user. And a reminder that all of these links are accessible in the presentation. I'm going to drop Maria's response to that back in the chat in a moment so that you can access the presentation and click those links again if you want to incorporate it into your own trainings at your institution. I'm going to pause and open it up to the room if anyone wants to come off of their mic and ask a verbal question.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much. If not, let's keep going. All right, so next, let's get into the operable. So again, this is part of the POR abbreviation. This is the letter O. So operable really makes sure that our user interface are interactive and everyone can access them. So we want to make sure that, you know, everything is keyboard accessible. So make all the functionalities available to your keyboards. By testing like this, you're going to kind of ensure that assistive technologies are also able to access that same content. So I'm actually going to open up this link here for ARIA Authoring Practices Guide. So now this is a site that is created by the W3C. So they create a lot of guidelines for the web, and they talk about some patterns and resources that you could use to design accessible content, how to use ARIA landmarks, and I'll go over that in a little bit, but really talks about what are some things that you could do and to create accessible content. And if we start looking at some of the patterns, they go over things like how do you create accessible accordions or alerts or dialogues, right? Breadcrumbs, buttons. So you can see that they have a very extensive list here, and they will talk about, so let's go into one. Let's look at checkboxes. They'll talk about some of the things that you should consider for design. They'll show you some examples, and they'll also, very importantly, talk about what are the keyboard interactions that are expected from this type of component. So like whether it's a button or accordion, like we saw, they really outline this here. So like as you're creating this content, really go check out what are the keyboard interactions that are expected for this type of component. And once your application is ready, go ahead and test it out. Make sure that these are aligned and that everything works as it's supposed to. And then, of course, they really talk to some development techniques. So definitely have your development teams check this resource out. All right, so next up, you also want to make sure that you're providing enough time for your users to interact and use your content. And making sure that you're not that you're not using design practices that are known to cause seizures or physical reactions. Let's talk a little bit about what that means. So you want to make sure that your page doesn't contain anything that flashes more than 3 times in 1 second, unless the flash is below this threshold, which I linked out to that definition here, but really just avoid any flashing content on your site. I would say that that's pretty safe. And also be careful with motion animation. So motion animation triggered by interaction should be able to be disabled unless the animation is essential to your functionality or information. But really try to avoid any moving animation that cannot be stopped on your site, as it can be very distracting for somebody with cognitive disabilities. All right. Next up, let's make sure that your content is navigable. So we've talked about keyboard access, enough time, seizures. Now we're at navigable. So this is really making sure that you're providing multiple ways for users to be able to navigate through your content, find your content, or determine where they are within your content. So I'm going to open up this landmark semantic structure guide that talks about this a little bit, and I'll just open it up really notes and then we'll come back to this. But this talks about some of the things that you can use to start kind of sectioning your website so that users can navigate through the sections of your site. So you can do things like an aside, a footer, a header, a main section of your site, any of your navigational sections, and then other regions that you want to create within your page. So let's go back to my presentation and let's look through some of this kind of structure that you can create in your pages. So number one, I would say really pay close attention to your heading structure. So headings give structure to the page, as heading levels are used to create kind of a hierarchical order onto your page. So looking at this heading structure, you want to make sure that you're nesting headings by their ranks, and that you're ranking H1, which is the most important heading, all the way down to H6, which is the least important heading, and then that you're not skipping any content. So for example, let's go to this landmark page really quick. So in this page, I would say that this would be my H1, my most important header, my header 1, right? And then that kind of encapsulates a couple of other sections of information, right? So like that, all of the subsections in here speak to that landmark region. So all of these might be H2, right? So like this kind of section off from that section. And then if we had, let's say, other categories within there. So for example, this one talks about landmark roles. This would be an H2. And within that section, there are some smaller subsections. So this would be an H3. So we're kind of nesting headers within different sections to create that order. Next up, we can also start structuring our content with the use of landmarks, like we've been talking about. So landmarks act as sections that help structure your content. So a lot of pages kind of follow the structure that we see here, where we have a header, right? Somewhere here that holds all of our logo, our page name, right? We might have a navigation bar that where users can interact to navigate through different parts of our site. We have our main content that holds like the most important piece of information of our content, and then our footer, right? And then sometimes we have an aside that talks about like relevant things that are relevant to the main content but can stand kind of on their own. And then I created a little cheat sheet that talks about the intended use for this are. Going back to the guide that I kind of shared before, they do talk about some simple steps that will help you decide what landmark is the best for you, or the appropriate landmark for the type of content that you're trying to create. So definitely check out that resource. So let's talk about some of the considerations. We want to make sure also that your link purpose can be determined by the link text alone. So for example, we want to avoid phrases like click here or learn more, because assistive technologies might be able to pull a list of links that are available on the page. And if all the links, if they just get a list of links that say click here, learn more, they might not know what that content relates to. Like, where are they headed if they do interact with that link? So you want to make sure, like, instead of learn more, read more about accessibility, right? Read more about web content accessibility guidelines. Like, that's a much better, more meaningful link text. Provide descriptive headings and labels for your forms. Provide any bypass blocks, such as a skip to main content link, which some of you might have seen if you try to tab to a page and the first thing you see is skip to main content, where users can just navigate to the main content without having to go through all of the navigational items in the top of your page. Then you want to make sure that you're having descriptive and informative page titles, and that the focus order is logical and follows the page structure. And providing a focus visible indicator. So let's talk a little bit about focus and what that means. I'm going to start at the top of the page here. So I'm just going to click, and then I'm going to start tabbing through. So the first tab that I see is skip to main content, right? That's up here all the way to the left. If I tab again, we do see this kind of white border around, and as I kind of go through, I see this focus moving, right? And I can follow it, and it is following the same structure that I see on the page. It's following that same flow to the page. So it is the correct order, and I'm able to follow it because it has the visual focus indicator. So that's kind of what we are trying to get at, and make sure that your focus visible indicators meet the color contrast also. All right, so then we've got input modalities, so making sure that your users can operate this type of functionality to various keyboards or inputs. So let's talk about import functionality. Let's go over here. So this is another great resource to share with your development teams. This article talks about creating accessible forms. So it talks about different types of form elements like text input, radio boxes, check boxes, buttons, interactive images, and they talk about how you build it, and they provide the code and they provide an example. So today I just kind of want to briefly go over the example, and I'm going to do so by turning on my screen reader. So I am on a Mac. If you are on a Mac, you already have this already installed on your computer, but if you hit Command F5, you are going to get
To a banner. Link.
and I'm just going to pause it really quick, but you are going to get
To
VoiceOver
enable screen readers.
to come up. If it's the first time that you turn it on, you are going to get a little tutorial on how to use this tool, but definitely check it out when you get a chance. Again, that's Command F5. If you want to turn it off, you can also turn it off by Command F5. So it will be the same thing. But I do want to show you what the experience is like to, I'm going to try to fill out this name field here. So I'm just going to click here
Inputs. Unselected.
and I'm going to tap to it.
Name. Edit text.
So you see that it says name, edit text. So I know I'm in a text field because it says edit text, and the label for that is name. So I'm going to say Maria.
Maria. Enter your address. Edit text.
So I just hit tab again, and it landed me onto the next focusable element, which was this question. Well, this was this text field that says enter your address, and it told me edit text field, enter your address. So I know that I'm on a text field and I can start entering my address, right? So we can start seeing how assistive technology really interacts with this type of elements, right? And translate it to what I need to know.
Unchecked checkbox. Select your pizza toppings group. You are current.
So it even told me ham, select your pizza topping. So it was able to read the description. It read the label that this specific checkbox had, and it asked the question up on top, right? So I'll just turn it off for now, but I wanted you to get a sense of what this experience was like, and making you see that building these things correctly, right? Providing the semantics really translate this really nicely for assistive technology. So make sure this is a great resource for your engineers to check out. All right, so let's talk about some considerations for this. You, as a designer, you want to make sure that all of your labels, so those questions on top of your input fields, are visible, so you're not hiding any text. Make sure that you're matching this to be the actual accessible name for that field, because some developers will kind of give it a name and then hijack the name with something that's not visible. So make sure that your development team isn't doing that as you're kind of testing. Make sure that the label that you can read visibly is the same label that's being read by assistive technologies. Again, avoid using hidden text, and give accessible names to icons that match their functionality. So for example, some forms will have a little trash can to delete something. Make sure that trash can is not called trash can, but delete, right? Because that's the functionality that it will have. And of course, make sure that all of your items that are interactive have at least a 44 by 44 CSS pixel in size, so that it's easy to click. Nobody's going to miss it if they're, for example, on their mobile device trying to click on something. They'll have easy access to do so. All righty. Any questions so far? I'll take a pause here.
Welcome back. Thank you so much, Maria. I just want to call out our users who are speaking to each other in the chat. Someone said that their audio cut out and they missed what you said about click here. And another user responded that you said to use text that would describe that link out of context, such as click here to learn more about accessibility instead of just click here. So we had a question and it got answered. There's another question asking, you may be addressing this later, but curiosity about apps and tools like UserWay and whether or not they actually work.
I'm not familiar with UserWay. Does somebody want to come off mute and explain and elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, Maria, this is Jessica with South Arts. That was actually a question that I had about UserWay. It's an app that you can add to your website. I've seen it pop up with some other nonprofit organizations and also some commercial organizations. Yeah, so thank you, Jen Williams, who dropped the link in the chat. Basically, this particular app gives you options as a user to manipulate things like the contrast or even the language within the with what you're looking at online. And so I'm sort of curious as to whether those things are shortcuts, or do they actually work, or they just sort of get in the way of the accessibility work that needs to be done on the back end.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So I'm looking through their site now. I don't know too much about this specific tool, but I'll talk about more general sense of like what it's like to include things like this, right? So I'm going to just say right off the bat that when people are using assistive technologies, right, they have their own settings that they will use to improve their experience. So if I'm a super experienced, for example, screen magnification user, I'm going to have maybe some color contrast settings for myself so that I can really see the content the way that I need to see it. I might have some settings that maybe provide dark mode or enlarge my text sizing, right? So I want to say that we want to always allow people to customize their own settings. We want to make sure that we're not adding anything to our websites. And I'm not speaking to this tool specifically, just generally, but we want to make sure that we're not adding anything on our websites that will block people from being able to do that with their own assistive technologies. Now, if we're providing another additional way for them to do that on our site, that's fantastic. I would say that you should still pay attention to creating accessible content from the beginning. So for example, I would say that I would advise against doing something like, let's not worry about color contrast, because then we're going to just add a tool within our site that allows people to just change the color anyway, right? So we want to make sure that we're designing for accessible content, we're providing accessible content, and yes, we can extend that functionality of that app to meet additional needs by providing tools like this, but we want to make sure that our original content is accessible by itself. And then I do see a raised hand.
Hi there. So under operable, we talked about keyboard accessible seizures, making sure things aren't blinking. You mentioned enough time, providing users enough time to read and use content. We've mostly been talking about sort of static web pages that are engaged with on the user's time to begin with. What would be an example of something where you should have a consideration around time, some kind of time-based thing? I'm just struggling to imagine what is that?
Yeah, so a couple of things like that could be about media content, right? But I'll focus on this example. What about timeouts? Let's say that you have an authenticated experience and then you're timing out your users after 30 minutes, right? So you have to make sure that you're giving them plenty of warning. Are you allowing them to extend their session if needed? Are you allowing them to read through the content or have enough time with that warning to be able to interact, right? So like you want to make sure that you're giving them plenty of time to interact with your content. Like if you're having, sometimes you'll have like a little notification that says like, oh, like there's an error on your page. We're going to like, you're going to lose all your content, and then it just refreshes for you. You didn't even have time to even acknowledge that warning, right? So that's kind of what that means. And if you, yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, just that are there specific guidelines around, well, for this kind of timeout, it should be X amount of time, or this kind, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I recommend that you look at the web content accessibility guidelines. Let me just quickly
run there.
Yeah, it's all on there. I would say it is, they won't necessarily provide you exactly with what you need to do. That's definitely like a consideration that you and your design team should really talk about. They do provide some kind of start-off examples of what you should do. like provide at least like 2 minutes for people to interact with your content, right? Or I think they call out 20 seconds, but other research has shown that 2 minutes is kind of the sweet spot.
Thank you.
But yeah, check it out. Check it out. Feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about what you find out. And then I see another raised hand. Oh, I think you're on mute. I can't hear you. Let's see. Is it just me? Can anyone else hear her? Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry. We can't hear you. Okay, perfect. She'll type.
Awesome. And Maria, if I may, while she's typing, we had another question in the chat, and accolades for the information so far. The user is trying to see what the best way or sort of simple option is to get started doing and adding some of these pieces. They use GoDaddy, and they have some concerns or questions about what types of web providers may be more receptive to these additions or not. So any insight you can share there?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say that as long as you're writing your development team and design team to create accessible content, they should be able to use this across many different platforms. There are some kind of tools like WordPress or tools like that that might have some limitations as to what they can do. So I would really work with your development team to test out the functionalities that it has, and really testing out to make sure that as you're implementing some of the things that are available there, that they're also meeting the expected kind of recommendations from the web content accessibility guidelines, and all the keyword interactions that that they recommend, and all of that should match. Some of these tools aren't 100% accessible, and not all of the content that they create can be accessible. So I would definitely consider that, and really have your development teams test out that keyword functionality section.
Yeah, that's so great. So I want to ask, in the event that someone is a solo shop, you know, and they don't necessarily have access to a robust development team, do you have any guidance there?
Yeah, I would definitely say check out the resources I provided on the presentation, and they should walk you through how to test for all of these even with a small team.
Fantastic. And the question that we weren't able to hear verbally, that is now in the chat, is it best to have links open in a new window tab or stay on the current page?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it depends on what you're trying to achieve. Like, for example, if you're trying to open, I think it depends, right? Like, if you're trying to open a document, it might be better to open up in a new page, so that way people can leave the document open, keep interacting with your page. A little quick call out for things that are opening a new window or a new tab is that you also want to make sure that that's communicated in your design. So sometimes you'll see some designs that have a link with a little icon that kind of has a little arrow going to the top that kind of signifies like an external, like it's going to open up an external page, right? Another window, and then make sure that you're giving that little icon the correct alt text. So maybe saying external or will open up a new window, right? But yeah, you can work with your designers to determine what would be the best experience for that, knowing that you can stay within your site and have that document open, or taking them out altogether might kind of break that flow as they're going through this content.
Awesome.
All right.
That is all that we have, and I turn it back to you or anyone else who wants to raise their hand with a question.
Perfect. Thank you. So let's go over, I think I have a couple more things to go through before we get into our accessible form. So I'll go quickly through this one. So next we have understandable. So this is really looking at information should be understood by everyone. So make sure that your content is readable and understandable by everyone. Make sure that your content is predictable and it appears on the page the same way that somebody would expect to interact with it. So like, as I showed you before, right? Like, are you jumping from the top of the page to the bottom of the page to the middle of the page as you tap through, or is everything in the right flow, predictable? People, what you expect to happen is what's happening on the page. And of course, making sure that if you're using forms, that you're providing enough instructions and information for your users so that they don't make mistakes. But if they do make mistakes, that they are also that you're also providing enough information in your error messages so that they know what they need to do to correct those mistakes. So some considerations for this are making sure that your labels and instructions for your forms are clear and provided to the user. Make sure that you're providing descriptive error messages when errors are detected. Avoid using unusual phrases, idioms, or jargon that are likely to not be recognized by everyone. Make sure that you're providing expanded form or meaning of an abbreviation that you're using on the page. And avoid using language that is more advanced at lower secondary education level. And avoid making any major changes on the page when an element receives focus. So, as I was tabbing through, we saw that little focus ring around the element that I was tabbing through. As I'm tabbing through, I don't expect, right? So this is kind of going back to that predictability. I don't expect anything to suddenly change on me because I'm tabbing through, right? I don't expect a new page to load, for example, or a modal to pop up or an action to be triggered. I just expect myself to be navigating through the content, just trying to navigate through, find my way around. All right, and then the next one, so this was the R in poor, robust, making sure that your applications are robust enough so that it can be interpreted by the biggest variety of user agents like browsers and assistive technologies possible, right? So this is really done heavily by the development team. All right, then I have a couple of resources that I really encourage you to check out. So we've got the authoring practices that we went over, and then I have a couple of other things that will help your teams kind of adopt some of these, including some testing tools for headings, color contrast, and then I even have a resource for how your designers can annotate some of their designs so that the development teams know how they should be building these things correctly. All right, and then here are some references that I used for the presentation. Any other questions on this content so far? And I think we we should be
Hey
good.
there, no, we have not received any, but I just want to verbally remind people that all of the links are going to be inside of the presentation. And I'm actually going to drop the bit.ly link that was provided in your Eventbrite confirmation into the chat. So that's a little bit easier to access than trying to type the Google very long link in the event that you have to do some cutting and pasting, but people are welcome. Oh, actually, here's a question. What do you recommend when working with 2 languages? Our nonprofit is aimed at the Hispanic community, but we try to keep everything in both language, Spanish and English.
Oh, that's great. Actually, let's jump into an example for that. Well, I guess not an example, but let's look at this. So I'll say that that's fantastic, right? Language is one of the things that we consider for accessibility. We want to make sure that our content is accessible to the masses, right? So to as many people as possible. So one thing that you should consider for accessibility when you have a different language translator on your site is making sure that your development team knows to update the language attribute in your site. So for example, I'm just going to inspect anywhere on my site. So I just kind of right clicked anywhere and I selected inspect. Over my inspect tool, I'm just going to go all the way to the top where it says HTML. And then in there's this thing called lang. This stands for language, and then it is set to English. So most, English websites should be set to English. Let's say that I was doing Spanish, this should be set to Spanish, right? So like, I believe that's the code for it. So we just went through this website in English, and I just switched it. Let's see what happens.
Alejandro, to enable screen reader's hand, raised hand. Command plus option plus Z to learn. Screen reader. Intercom live chat to enable screen readers. Link, banner, link, step.
Okay, well, maybe I don't recall the Spanish language one, but if we have the language attribute set on the site, your screen reader is going to recognize that as the language that it's in, and it's going to read it in that language. When you switch language, you want to make sure that you're updating this language attribute to the right language, so assistive technologies will read it in that language. So for example, if this all of a sudden became a Spanish site, and then I didn't change the language here, my screen reader is going to try to read the Spanish content by reading it in English. So it's not going to make a lot of. And let's say that we have a website that has mixed languages in it. So for example, let's say that I have a little paragraph here that will be all in Spanish. You also want to make sure that your development teams would know to wrap that in a container, and that container could have its own language attribute set, so that that specific piece of content is read by assistive technologies in the appropriate language. And then Alejandro, I see your hands up.
Yes. So walking through, thank you so much. Like this is very, very sort of digestible, and it's so much content and so many different considerations, and you're making it very, very digestible. I'm finding it very useful to have examples when you're showing us these elements on actual websites and how they're set up. I'm wondering if you have any recommendations of any digital content or websites that are actually doing all of these things really well, that are adhering to the best practices, so that on my own go and kind of pick through and check and inspect segments and be like, oh, that's how they did this. Oh, that's how they did this, to see it all in practice.
Yeah, so I'll say I really like Microsoft's website, though I haven't seen it in a little bit. I haven't tested the accessibility of it in a couple of months, so I don't know what has changed, but I really like what they're doing there. In fact, one of the things that I wanted to include in my presentation today is that Microsoft even did like an Xbox adaptable controller, so that it has like accessible, it has switch accesses that you can plug into it. So they're doing some great stuff when it comes to accessibility. Definitely check them out. But yeah, great question. Oh, right. So let's continue on to creating accessible Google Forms. So we talked a little bit about some of the things that we need to consider for descriptive labels, where to position your labels, right? Now let's talk about, like keeping your labels and input fields close together, so people know people can easily understand the relationship between the question and the input field. Another good thing about this is, like, if people are using screen magnifications tools, if they're zooming like at 400%, for example, if they're not seeing the related question above the input field, they might not know where to find it. Again, same thing for instructions. Some instructions will have the label, which is the question, and then we'll have instructions right underneath, followed by the input field, or sometimes we'll have the instruction, the label, the input field, and then the instructions underneath. Just make sure that all of your pieces and elements that are related to that input field are close together and they're easy to find. And of course, like we said before, make sure that you're not using color alone as a visual indicator to convey information. For example, don't say all red input fields are required. Again, a lot of people are not going to be able to understand what that means. And then again, here's your handy dandy color contrast checker tool. All right, so let's talk about labels and instructions. You also want to identify which fields are required fields. Make sure that your instructions are clear and easy to understand. Make sure that you're pairing, and this is more of a technical piece, but make sure that you're pairing your labels and instructions to the corresponding input. And developers can use things like, if they're not using proper semantics, right, which you should, but you could use things like ARIA label, ARIA described by, or ARIA labeled by to give more context. Now let's get into some of the form structure. So we've gone over some of these today, right? But form elements inside the web include things like inputs, labels, select, text area, buttons, field sets, right? So all of these are used by developers to make sure that everything is paired correctly, make sure that assistive technologies are able to recognize what type of element you're interacting with. That way people know, okay, if I'm interacting with a checkbox, I know I can use my enter key, right, to do certain actions. And then also consider that by assigning different types of input, it also brings up different types of keyboards in your mobile devices. So I don't know if you're trying to input a number into a text area or something with using your mobile device, sometimes you'll see your keyboard pop up in like the numbers instead of your full alphabetical keyboard. And this is because those developers have built that functionality in there by providing an input type. So let's talk about creating basic Google accessible forms, right? I have an example on top, which I'll be going over. So this is the example here. And then we're going to be talking over the types of available content that you can create with Google Forms. And we're looking at Google Forms because I believe this is something that South Arts creates a lot of. So you have the ability to create sections within your forms. You can add images, you can add videos, you can add things like short answers or long answers. You have multiple choice and multiple choice grids, checkbox grids. You can do a drop down, you can do a linear scale, the same thing with date and time input fields. So let's go over this and just show you what it looks like. So here I have a Husky image, and this one has no hover text. So the Google Forms provides a way for you to set hover text in your images. I don't know why they named it this, but through my testing, this is actually what is the alt text. So in your hover text, make sure that you're actually defining what this. I have a short answer, so I kind of created one of each. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my screen reader and let's go through this form together to see what it's like.
VoiceOver on Chrome, example of heading level to enable screen reader support. Press command, learn more, list Husky in.
So I'm going to actually be using Quick Nav, which allows me to navigate some of the content kind of line by line with my arrow keys, because I do want to try to get to both Husky images and see what I get.
List Husky image without hover text. One Husky facing the camera front of the lighthouse looking into the distance to his right image. And
you know what? I realized that my voiceover might be speaking a little bit too fast. So I'm going to go ahead and edit that. And in fact, I want to show you how I edit that. I'm going to go over to voiceover utility. And let me just make sure that it opens up in this screen. So these are my voiceover kind of settings that I can edit. I'm going to go to verbosity, speech. And then in the speech rate, it allows me to change.
Rate 37. The best way to predict the future is to embed the voiceover on Chrome.
So I just kind of slowed it down a little bit.
Space now without to enable Husky facing the camera front of the lighthouse.
I'm going to go ahead to try to navigate to the next
Husky image with hover tap Lion King audio description. Click Husky image Lion King Husky image with.
So it looks like I can't access. So I go from this heading straight to the next section of the form. And this is because this image, this image had no alt text. So I actually did this backwards, but this one has no alt text. So my screen reader completely skips it. It completely skips it because I marked it as a decorative image by not giving it an alt text. One consideration for any video content that you add to your forms is make sure that it has transcripts, that it has captions available for your users. Next, I'm going to go try to fill out this name form.
At length, more play, leaving audio description. Carol enter inclusion audio disc to everyone. Thank you for the valuable information. YouTube will be waiting for a short answer.
Sorry, I'm getting some feedback from people typing in the chat. It's getting picked up by my screen reader. So this is actually a great thing to demonstrate that sometimes I'm trying to interact with something and I'm getting this feedback coming from somewhere else. So this is what I mean. It's so important for you to create these user experiences where you don't have a lot of notifications coming up because people might be trying to interact with your content and then your notifications are actually interrupting their flow, right? So the one thing to consider as you're designing for your applications.
Enter leave it what their name, short answer label, required question, required invalid data, edit text, first and last name, short answer description.
So here I just wanted to show you that it read name,
Anonymous
short.
to everyone. Voiceover off.
Okay, I'll mute it for I'll take it off for now, but I did want to show you how will screen readers pick up this descriptive text? So for me, I'm using VoiceOver. I hear the label. I hear that I was on a text field. I hear that it was required. And then after a brief pause, I heard the description of what they were trying to tell me. So like the instructions were followed by all of these things. So going back to our presentation, I know we're kind of running a little bit out of time. So I wanted to show you that some considerations for creating your forms is you want to make sure that you left align all of your content so it's easy to find for everyone, particularly users who might be using script magnification tools and they're really zoomed in. If everything is left aligned, they can follow that pattern and easily find all of the content on your page. We also want to identify required fields. We want to provide descriptive labels, descriptive instructions, and add question descriptions to the following options inside Google Forms. And I'm saying only these, because I actually found that there are a couple that completely get ignored. So I'm going to highlight those in the next slide. But I will also say that there are response validators, so unique error messages that Google Forms allows you to add for short answers, long answers, and checkboxes. And I've actually added the documentation that they provide for this because it's pretty great how they kind of walk you through that. But one of the things you should always, another thing you should look at is that for images, set the hover text to describe your meaningful images, because this is going to be acting as your alt text for your images. Leave hover text empty if you want it to be decorative. Make sure that you're resizing any extreme large images so that users don't have to scroll so much to get access to your content. And then make sure, of course, that all of your content has enough color contrast. Here's your little contrast checker. And for videos, make sure that captions and transcripts are available. But here are some considerations, right? Ensure that your labels are descriptive enough, as some of the descriptions in Google Forms are not consistently recognized. So for example, when we're looking at multiple choice, checkbox, drop down, linear scale, date and time, all of these, for none of these, the instructions that you're providing underneath your labels, they don't get picked up. And I'll show you an example really quick. And then a quick call out that for linear scales, the labels that you provide for your specific scale are also not recognized. And for some reason, for date and time, the labels are not recognized. So let's jump over and let me show you what I mean. So let's look at the multiple choice.
Voice. To enable screen reader support screen, these select other radio. What are your hobbies? Pretzel radio button. Which of these snacks do you prefer? Multiple choice label. Required question. Required radio group. You are currently on a radio button. To select this option.
So we heard it read the question. So which of these snacks do you prefer? But it never read add a new snack if you don't like any of these, which is part of the instructions.
Connection is unstable. Control. VoiceOver off.
But that's the instructions that I added. So if you're providing critical instructions in this type of question, this is not going to get picked up. And then for some reason, though, this type of question, it picks up everything. It picks up the description, the question, all of the labels, the table, the columns. So yeah, just definitely take a look at some of the things that are missing in that functionality. And I would honestly avoid using date, time, since you can't even access the question label from there. And then I do see a question in the chat of where do you add alt text or descriptions in Google Forms? So let's actually go to Google Forms. Let's try to create one. All right, hold on. let me do it over here. And then I'll bring it over. Google Forms. But while I'm looking for this, does anybody have questions? Feel free to unmute yourself. I'm pretty much at the end of the presentation here. In fact, let me go to this slide. Does anybody have questions as I pull up a new form? Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and show you this form. So I'm going to add an image. So I'm just going to copy this W3C image URL. And I'm just gonna add it. Okay, let's look up Husky again. I have a Husky, so that's what I'm that's what I'm into these days. So I'm gonna copy the image address. I'm gonna try to put it in here. URL not valid. Am I not copying the right thing? Copy. Nope, wrong thing. Image address. Okay, here we go. If I add it in here, then if you go, I believe like over here, hover text. So there is a like a little 3 dots option to allow hover text, and then it appears underneath here. And then this will be your alt text that explains your image. All right. If nobody has any questions,
So
I
Maria,
do see.
we
Yeah.
did have one hand raised, Cheryl Shambly.
Perfect.
Hello there. Thank you so much. My question is, if you are part of a small shop like I am, and we work only, when we work with designers, we're only consulting out for that. So I'm wondering if there are any of these changes that you would recommend for us to address first. Are there any that you would say, okay, this will have a huge impact for the most number of people? So if you have to go in an order, start here and then do this. Any thoughts about that?
I would definitely say start with keyboard testing. So make sure that you just grab your page, tab, not using your mouse at all, use your tab key to make sure that all of your interactive elements are focusable, that you're able to interact with them in the way that they outline based on keyboard functionality. And if you meet that, you're gonna cover a lot of your issues. So I would say make sure that everything that you should be interacting with, you're able to, and then you can go for things to like color contrast, alt text, and things like that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I have learned a lot.
Oh, great. I'm happy about that. All right, anybody? Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time. As always, here are more demonstrations, more demos, some other resources. Thank you so much. Feel free to always reach out to me for any questions you have. I'm happy to always help and geek out about accessibility with all of you. Here's my LinkedIn and my Twitter profile. So yeah, feel free to reach out anytime you want.
Thank
Maria,
you so much, Maria. I just want to chime in real quick with some notes and reminders because we had some people join after our initial introduction. First of all, a big a round of applause for Maria for this presentation. This is so great. And I think one of the great things about it is that we can continue to go back to this and keep learning from this presentation. So I do have a quick question for you, Maria. A couple of people have asked about this availability, and I know that you shared it and we shared it with attendees ahead of time. Is it okay for folks to share with their internal teams as well as they're working on some of these accessibility issues?
Yes, absolutely. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions.
Great, thank you. I know that it's going to be shared, and I will also in a follow-up email send it to you all. And just a reminder that we do have some micro accessibility grants. The funds are limited for this. And so if you are thinking of applying, I dropped the link in the chat. I'll be sharing the chat with everyone as well as this presentation. But those micro accessibility grants, they're small grants, and things like, hiring somebody to do a website audit or having someone help you with alt text within your website, those are all things that accessibility grant can be used for. And then I want to also thank my colleague Leland McKeithen for putting together a resource page for accessibility resources for you to use. So that is also in the chat, but it's also available on our website as well. I think if you're Google South Arts accessibility, that link does pop up for you. And then I would be remiss if I did not thank the National Endowment for the Arts for their support of this program and for the support for the micro accessibility grants, and also our state arts agency partners as well for their support and always ongoing partnership together in collaboration. And finally, I want to give a big thanks to Karanda Baker and Ivan Shustak, who are my colleagues at South Arts, for their technical support today, fielding questions and helping this experience to be as smooth as possible in a technical digital world. Again, I can't thank you enough, Maria. This has been a fantastic presentation. A quick anecdote. My friend who works in IT, Joe Winter, mentioned that I should get in touch with Maria. And so I bothered her on Twitter and she got back in touch with me and so graciously offered to do this for the arts community. And so I am very thankful for that. After this, after we hop up, a survey link is going to pop up. Please take time to fill out that survey. I'm also going to be emailing it out. So don't worry if you got to jet to the next thing. I know we're all busy. But if you could take a few moments, it takes about 4 minutes to fill out the survey, gives us a little bit of feedback about today, but it also will give us feedback about future workshops and ideas that you would like to see South Arts help convene, support, or amplify. So again, thank you all today for a wonderful presentation on this Friday, almost fall day. Have a great weekend, everyone, and please reach out if you need anything. And on behalf of South Arts, thank you, Maria, thank you, everyone, for all the work you do every day to make our communities lovable and livable.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.